Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your host, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Election University Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
And thanks for joining us today. We are back in the studio.
Well, and I'm back.
You're back.
Because I missed the last one.
June was a little bit of a rough month.
Yeah.
As I'm sure anyone who is listening, who might be left of center, might be feeling. June was a rough month.
Little bit.
Yeah. So we are ready to go. We've got exciting new episodes in the queue coming up for the next, 6 weeks now.
Yes.
And we are very excited to get launched. So today we're going to be talking about media and what our down ballot campaigns can be doing to maximize their media presence.
Yeah. I think that one of the most terrifying thing for candidates and people in general, really, when I talk to them, is talking to a reporter. You're always afraid that you're going to get something wrong, or there's an assumption that all journalists are trying to do like the gotcha and like catch you in a lie or use your words against you. And I'm hoping that when we talk to Marco today, we're going to reveal that that is not the case and that media doesn't have to be scary and putting your message out there doesn't have to be scary.
Right. So we're going to talk to Marco Lowe, who is an adjunct professor at Seattle University, but also is the political commentator on King 5 News. And he is a
local to Seattle news station. So
yes, that's our NBC affiliate here in Seattle, Washington. But on top of Marco just having a long experience and great background with media, he's also worked on a bunch of campaigns. So he's worked on mayoral campaigns. He's worked on congressional campaigns. He was on the presidential campaign for John Edwards back in 2004 and has worked in states like Iowa and Wisconsin. He has a great background, lots of diversity on his campaign experience, and also has this media experience as well. So he knows what campaigns are struggling with when it comes to the media. On top of that, he's just a super bright guy. He's very talented. How he juggles everything that he's doing. He's an adjunct professor. He's got a full-time job. He does commentating on King 5 News. How he juggles all of this and maintains a positive disposition is beyond me.
We're going to find out.
We're going to find out. We're going to get to the bottom of it. So I'm really excited about that. I also wanted to take a moment and announce that as of today, we are downloaded in 48 countries.
What?
48.
That's so amazing.
I know the last time we did this check-in, Rainey, we were at 31. And for some reason now we've just exploded.
We are worldwide. Your down ballot races in the United States, information worldwide.
I don't understand what's happening, but Kenya is one of our new countries. Right. Laos, we've got a bunch of countries that I've never even heard of before that are downloading our podcast. So I'm very excited. Thank you to all of our new listeners. Thank you for the folks who are promoting it and sending it to other prospective candidates and campaigns. We love it. Thank you so much for doing it. Now, let's get into the media and let's help some campaigns understand a little bit more about how they can enhance their relationship with the press and the media.
Sweet.
So, Marco, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, we talked a bit in the intro about your bio, but we'd love to talk and elaborate a little bit more on your campaign experience and background.
Okay. Well, I loved politics almost from the moment I was born. My parents were both more progressive, but in bipartisan jobs, and it just killed them how much I wanted to work on a campaign, to the point that I couldn't do it until after I was out of college and they couldn't cut off tuition money.
Severe.
Within a year of being out of college, the governor was running, a new open seat appeared, and I ran right into the office to volunteer, and they took me. And it's amazing. I tried to set up friends and acquaintances, had my dad talk to somebody to help me get on the campaign, and literally I just had to walk in the door. And that's the beautiful thing about campaigns, is that if you're going to volunteer, they want you.
Oh, yes.
So I went from a full-time job. The employer very nicely let me go to part-time. And so I would wake up in the morning, bike, halfway there, hop on a bus, work from 6 to 9 with the fundraising department where I was put in, go to work from about 9:30 to 1, and then bike back and go until 10 or 11 with fundraisers. And I did that for a long time. It was incredibly hard, and I loved every second of it. And that led to, luckily, the candidate won. I worked in the governor's office, and then everything was off to the races, and I sort of merged my career between working for elected officials and working on campaigns. And it was honestly some of the best years of my life.
So when you're talking about this as your first experience on campaigns, how were you trained? Like, how did you learn to do this work, especially something as important as fundraising?
So, the first thing that went to my head as you asked, how was I trained, as I pictured myself being thrown in the deep end of the pool, which is most campaigns' PhDs. Do you swim or not? But in reality, I brought a very minor ability to the campaign they didn't have, and that is I could work with Microsoft. I think it was Print Shop. It was their very simple page layout software from the mid-90s. But I was good at it. I could crank out invitations for the fundraisers, and that's all they asked for. And I was supposed to do a little rotation around the campaign to get housed, and my first one was in fundraising, and they did not let me go. So I was doing 2 or 3 of those a day in the morning so that the invitations could go out for the next couple of weeks of fundraisers. And then that night, I would just, go out in the car, have the wine and cheese that you euphemistically think are at every fundraiser, and do name tags. And that was it. Very low skill, but I just showed up. And that's apparently, according to Woody Allen, 90% of life. And I just kept doing it, and you get better, and then the candidate starts to know you, and you start to realize how you can make things a little better for the operation. And that was it. There wasn't much training. I think I just knew how to use a very crappy page layout software.
It was learn as you go, essentially, what
Yes.
you're saying. Yeah. What similarities are there between these various campaigns that you've worked on? You've worked on mayoral, you've worked on gubernatorial, you've worked on presidential, congressional. What are the similarities that run through all of these campaigns?
They all made me pray for death at some point during the day.
Maybe other than that?
Other than that, I think because everybody's going, tell me something I don't know about campaigns. I think they are an avalanche. All campaigns are just everything sliding down the hill at the same time, and they're going to meet at the same point at the bottom of the hill. One campaign's on one side of the valley, you're on the other side of the valley, and you know it's going to end. There's a million pieces moving. It's not that coordinated, but inertia is throwing you forward. And it really is. I always wonder why the business community doesn't show up at every campaign, win or lose, and start just grabbing people to go work for them, because that is the real training of a campaign, that you can handle crises, plural, per day and not jump out the window, and that you're constantly trying to fix problems with very limited budget, if any. And at the same time, having another side of the opposition on the campaign launching rockets at you the whole time. They're all crazy. I just loved it.
So
I'm not selling it very well.
We're all crazy, not they.
Yeah. Totally true.
So as part of what you do currently, you are a TV political commentator. Can you talk a little bit about what you're allowed to say and what is taboo when you're on TV?
To be honest, they never really told me what to say or not say. I knew a reporter who had gone to the same grad school. She reached out to me in a pinch. She'd reached out originally just to get to know the city. And then in a pinch, they needed kind of an academic voice, because I also teach campaigns and elections at the university. And I just had been watching electeds talk for so long, and had done media relations myself. Keep it short. Answer the question. Don't go off topic. And that's really what they want. So as long as you're able to do that on tape, then they'll have you come in and do it live as soon as they think you're not going to screw it up. So you really just try to stick to the question at hand and be pithy, quick. A joke if you think it works, but otherwise, just the facts. I would also say that I work very hard to be nonpartisan I really hope that I'm helping to connect people to politics and elections by being on TV. And I try not to be that guy that's got a hatchet that he's throwing at somebody else.
And so speaking of that, are there norms anymore in this space when it comes to political commentary or dealing with the press? Has everything been kind of thrown out the window since the 2016 election?
I think it all depends on what the show is. So, for instance, I get a call from the department that I teach for whenever a reporter wants to talk, unless they have a relationship with me. And one day, the local affiliate for Fox, which is well regarded, wanted to do an interview. And it was when Bernie Sanders was just starting to really catch fire. And I'm sitting there, and I'm not joking, the first 3 questions, they had said the word socialist 23 times. And I kind of just casually lean over and look at the sticker on the side of the camera, and it was Fox News. It was not the affiliate. It was Fox proper. They actually have an office in town. And they wanted me to be much more of a firebrand that the world's going to end with Bernie Sanders, or that he's the best thing ever. They would work it, they'd make me look however they wanted. And I just went to the most benign conversation I could have. So I think if you wanted to be crazy and like Crossfire, there's a world and a show for that. For me, for whatever reason, and I am quite partisan, I didn't feel any interest in it. I really hope I can just connect people to what is one of the most essential parts of our democracy.
Well, and I bet that's appreciated by news stations who care about being fair and balanced and aren't just like parroting opinion all over the place.
Yes, and there are times when they've put me at the table across from somebody who's a GOP, former candidate, what have you. It still is very congenial, to be honest with you. It's not like let's put 2 scorpions in the jar and shake them. It works.
Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of media. I think it's important for our prospective and first-time candidates to calibrate their expectations on what they can get out of the media, right?
Sure. Not
going to get above the fold in your local paper. Not going to, get a 4-camera press conference when you make your announcement, unless you're, a congressional U.S. Senate or, a big time race. But, your city council, your auditor, your commissioners, your sheriffs very likely aren't going to get that kind of coverage. So can you walk us through what an appropriate expectation is in terms of your media coverage for the entirety of your campaign?
Sure. It's going to not meet your expectations. That's the full answer you need to know. You'll be disappointed, and the candidate will remind you of it every hour on the campaign. The longer answer is, you're right. It is like a hockey stick. It's a lot like fundraising. Nobody cares in the beginning, and then right at the end, there's a lot of intensity, and you will get more attention to the point. Like the day before voting, if the candidate goes to tour a retirement community, 9 cameras do show up. The trick is there are ways to generate media before that hockey stick moment, and that's really where the great communications consultants are made and earn their pay on campaigns.
What I tell down ballot campaigns, generally speaking, is you may get your bio puff piece, right? We call them puff pieces. Yep. The not really talking much about the dynamics of the race, but really just your background and who you are and you're running for this position, just the facts, ma'am, kind of story. Once you'll get that early, and then if there's conflict or controversy, you'll get coverage there. And then exactly what you're saying, like at the end, there may be some sort of horse race comparison that might be a little bit on your message, maybe not at the end, and that you shouldn't expect too much more than that. Is that about on par with what you see across the country and for these down ballot races?
It is. First thing what I'd say is for a down ballot race, I'd forget the 5 o'clock news. I'd focus on the bloggers and the smaller news sources that are very influential within your district and boundary, because they are desperate for content. In some ways, you can almost write a story or at least generate something that's interesting, particularly if you're attacking your opposition on something that's timely and relevant to the community. And those places will cover the heck out of that and very useful and move the needle in a race. For the larger things, larger media outlets, I agree with you. The only thing I would say that does work is sometimes there is something timely. Let's say through opposition research, the other side has done something that is newsworthy. That you can feed. You can put it on the record or off the record. It doesn't really matter. And get it in even when you'd think otherwise this race isn't interesting, because the salaciousness of what the other person had done, what the campaign had done, is newsworthy.
Would you say the other addition to that, I'm thinking about current events, like if there is a rally in your town for something like we've seen people rallying for recently, and you know, one candidate shows up but another one doesn't, then I can see news media getting involved. But you can't create just, what am I trying to say?
What I heard was if they don't come to the rally, that's something that I would look more to push out to social media, which you should be developing, and which reporters monitor a lot. I'm always surprised how many reporters I see getting stories just from social media that sometimes even the campaign misses the newsliness, if that's a word, of what just happened, newsworthiness. But another way to look at it is, let's say on one race, we just were doing fairly good real-time opposition research. I ended up, as the campaign manager, going to a meeting amongst gun owners, and this candidate who was on the record supporting the assault gun ban. This is before it was repealed. And he, at this event, said, I don't support it anymore. And boom, we went right there, and reporters wanted to cover it. And those are also ways you can get news. So I would agree, down ballot races don't get a lot of news, but if you've got a good nose for what reporters want, you can generate it. That also just brings up the point, you need to build, develop, and maintain good relationships with reporters.
What are the rules of engagement with the press? So when you're talking about building these relationships, what are the do's and don'ts that candidates and prospective candidates out there should keep in mind when dealing with the press?
I think reporters, the first thing I had to learn about them that surprised me, I think I came into politics having them sit next to Zeus, and they're all prim and smart and unbiased and perfect, and they're just, doing their thing. And then I realized, no, they're humans, they have bad days, they can make mistakes, and that was really helpful, because at least then my expectations weren't dashed. But build a friendship with any reporter that's going to cover your race. At least be able to email them or call them and have them know who you are. But ones that are really covering the race, a reporter once said to me, I'm just so tired of being asked out to coffee by communications directors, but you need to do that, and maybe something a little stronger than coffee. So you can build that relationship. And if they like you and you like them, do it more often. It's not just a one-time thing. Every couple of weeks, let's go out for a beer. Maybe you're going to plant a story over the beer. They know what you're doing, but you may still like each other regardless. But what if that story comes popping up and you want to figure out how to place it? It's a whole other level of thought. If I put it in the paper, then all the TV people and radio guys can cover it. If I just give it to one TV station, the other TV stations won't touch it. There's a whole art to where you plant it, based on both your relationship and what the story can do after you plant it.
I think that's a good segue and kind of into the next question about press releases, because as a person who worked in radio who would just receive dozens or hundreds of press releases in a week, to being a communications director where now I'm the one sending the press releases, it's the bane of my existence, because either I've been the one to just click delete or the one who worked way too hard on writing it for everyone else to click delete. And so that's where the relationships come in, right? Do you have, what is your philosophy on press releases? When are they effective? And how can you use them well?
Honestly, I don't think I'd use them. I really don't. I don't think they have much of an effect. If a communication staffer just has to have a relationship with the people that are covering the race, and that's your press release. You are contacting them individually. They know you. It's clearly not something that went to 10,000 people. And then social media takes care of the rest. Yeah. The time and work that goes into press releases is just silly when Twitter can do it in 140 or 280 characters. There I am dating myself again.
So if I'm a city council race in a rural or suburban area and my budget's $10, $15, $20,000, I'm not going to be bringing on a communications person, most likely. Yep. And maybe or maybe not, I'll have a friend in my friends and family network that has done communications that can help in that space. But let's just presume that our listeners out there who are thinking about doing this don't. What should they do? How should they outreach to the press? Should they cobble a list of all of the press that cover in their area and then just start having conversations with them? What are the tools that we can give these folks to really build up their relationships with the press?
For that small of race, the candidate's probably going to be doing a good portion of it. And honestly, I'd say the candidate should enter the race for these relationships. I think it's probably not too late, but you would have such a head start over anybody else running if these reporters know you, like you, and most importantly, trust you. But if you do have a relative that's helping, same thing. If they're not there, they got to get in there, get a relationship, get started, and then get up on social media and only be doing it if it's worth doing. And what I mean by that is, as Rainey said, like I've had consultants say you need to do a press release a day, and it's like, oh God, yeah, okay. So we doorbelled our 6,333rd door today, and that's a press release. It's like, no, that's a tweet.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff. And if the reporter is interesting, they'll come ask you. Like, ooh, what's that? In fact, in some ways, I think the reporter gets their spidey senses tingling. Ooh, that tweet looks kind of innocuous, but I think there's something deeper. What's going on? And they reach out. You also, I think, so you're using social media, you have relationships, you have good judgment over what is actually newsworthy. I mean, you have to always put yourself in the shoes of that editor. Is somebody going to read this? Because I know it really, really, really matters to your candidate that Joe down the street endorsed him, but nobody else cares except for Joe. So forget it. Don't let that be cluttering somebody's inbox. You want them to see your name or your staffer's name and know that it matters. So have a good judgment for what's newsworthy and be pithy, be interesting, be a little provocative. Again, the reporters are trying to sell ads. Well, they're not trying to, but they need viewers that do that. And if you're not putting out something that's interesting or a little bit pushing the edge, they're not going to cover it.
Well, Twitter is a great platform on which to be pithy and sarcastic and to respond to things. I've had a lot of success in tagging particular reporters in my tweets. If I want them to respond to me, I would say don't assume that reporters are following you just because you're running for office. Engage with them. They want to be engaged with. Exactly. And if they're not following you, ask them to follow you. Yeah. Or, I mean, we just had an exciting race in New York 14th, and it's Ocasio-Cortez, I believe. I mean, I was following her on Twitter from very early on, and she was naming reporters that weren't even putting her in the headline of stories about her. So, I mean, you can push them. Again, they're human. You don't be mean, don't start fights, but you can challenge them, and you should. It's a relationship, and I think it's just really important to make sure the engagement you're doing with them is of value, even if it's kind of calling them out.
So let's talk about things on the record versus off the record. What does that mean? And when should a candidate or a communications person take something off the record? So my first rule is it's always on the record, even if you say it's off the record. So I will oftentimes say to a reporter, even to this day, this is off the record. What I'm saying, I still fear in some way may get out. So it doesn't mean it's a free fire zone. It just means you shoot a little more. So on the record, it's what you want people to have attributed to your name on message. You're getting it out there. Off the record, maybe, hey, did you know our opposition just took money from X? You don't necessarily want your fingerprints on it. The reporter will tell you if they're going to let that stay off. I mean, they won't say, you told me this off the record, but they're going to say, I can't do a story unless you're willing to comment on this. But anytime you talk to the media, this is quoting an old friend, it is an engagement and risk management. You don't know where the story is going to go. So yes, you're off the record. It may be something you don't want attributed to you, but you do want to have in a reporter's hands. But always assume it could come back and bite you in the backside, so do be careful. It doesn't mean you don't use off the record. Just don't assume you're as safe as you think you are.
Yeah, I think that's the part that terrifies most people and why they're scared to talk to reporters. And so for those who feel nervous or apprehensive about that, what advice would you give?
You have to talk to the media. There's no way you're going to win your race without talking to the media. And you don't want to be overly flip, because a lot of people get in trouble with that. But to be completely unhelpful, I'll say you also don't want to be overly conservative. You've got to hit a natural balance where you're able to think about what you're saying. You can practice it before you talk to them. You can have a list in front of you that the only topics you're really going to touch on. But you've got to be able to give them something that's interesting and able to be used on the radio or on TV or in their story without off the cuff, and sometimes greatly damaging your campaign.
One of the things that I have recommended to candidates if they're not prepared to talk to a reporter in real time, so they get a call from a reporter and they're just like not in a headspace to do it, or they haven't practiced, or they're completely caught off guard, is to ask them when their deadline is, and then if they can call them back that they're in the middle of something. Do you advise that, or do you think that that's
absolutely? In fact, with most new candidates, I always have one of those hiccups where a reporter called them, they talked to them. We hadn't talked about messaging or response, and like, why did you talk to them? Well, they called me. What was I supposed to say? It's like, people don't think that. Again, it's kind of how I came to politics. Like, oh, they're sitting next to Zeus. I can't say no. I'm like, yes, you can, and you can say no comment, or you can say I'll call you back. That's essential. In fact, I think the go-to thing for candidates, even when they have a relationship with the reporter, is I'll call you back.
So let's talk about crisis management too. What are some tips if it's a candidate-driven crisis, or jurisdiction crisis, right? There's a school shooting, or there's, an apartment building burns down of a beloved business owner, or, some sort of crisis that can happen that can impact the campaign one way or the other, depending on response. What advice do you give candidates and prospective candidates out there in terms of dealing with crises?
So when it's personal, almost the first and only rule is get everything out right now. And candidates are oftentimes loath to do that because it doesn't make them look good. But if there's something that happened, whether it was a mistake or something dug up out of their past the campaign wasn't aware of, you just need to get it all out, because it always finds its way out. You're in this business long enough, and you see a story start at a trickle, and you can almost write the last story that's going to come out. And the only control you have is that you can do the information, you can give the context, and you can move on from there. In terms of like a crisis happening in the jurisdiction, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and you're recommending that because you think the voters are forgiving when you put your information out in its totality and are remorseful if it's a DUI or DWI or some sort of sexual escapade, or using drugs, or lying out about your resume, or something along those lines. You think that getting ahead of it and being honest and forthright in it means that the voters will be more forgiving? Is that
rather than praying it goes away?
Yeah, well, it won't go away. The story becomes that they're finding the story, and reporters want to be the next one to get the next level of the story. And pretty soon you have hordes of people chasing the story, as opposed to, yep, I was 23. I made a horrible decision. I got a DUI driving home from a bar one night. I'm horribly sorry. I've never gotten one since, and it embarrassed me to this day. You can almost see the reporters deflate as the hunt is off. It's the other thing is, most things the other side has. If it's a big enough race, if it's a smaller race, things, I wouldn't say I'm announcing my candidacy for city council of Pawnee, Indiana, and by the way, I got a DUI at 23. But for the really big races, you do. I mean, you need to. It will be found. There's no question. I've seen stuff dug up out of obscure counties that nobody knew the elected official had lived in. Minor offenses. So it's all out there.
Yeah, we had a terrifying podcast interview of opposition research and the things that you can find and how easy it is to get those.
Yeah,
it's the worst moment of my class, because almost everybody in my campaign's election class fancies themselves in the White House at some point, and I go through everything that can be found online. You just watch people warming up their resumes to go to law school, and then I tell them, "Hey, but look who's in the White House. You're okay. You're going to be fine."
Right. I mean, that's the other part of this that we have been struggling with on the podcast, is because I feel like everything has an asterisk next to any 2016 reference, right? That Trump is an anomaly. You don't get to be what he is in office or prior to office, or what he has in his history, and run successfully for office. You don't get to avoid questions about your taxes, and unless you are Donald Trump, and good for him for being able to dodge that and deflect it for all these years, but your likelihood of doing the same is probably not as high.
But not as related to Donald Trump as much as he just set the bar so low in terms of what to expect from him. And that's not a pejorative. He never said I was a saint. He never put it out there that there would be a surprise if something was uncovered. And I think the old rule book for getting ready to run for office was you need to be the saint. You never do drugs. You do all these things perfectly, and then maybe you can win if you're this, this perfect person, which nobody is. And I think that society in general has become more accepting of understanding we're all not perfect than not. And I think he just kind of took a Mack truck through that loophole, but I think it had been happening for a long time.
Huh. All right. Yeah. So barring a crisis or controversy, should down ballot campaigns release any expectations? Should they hug and release their hopes of getting any television coverage? Is this really about blogs and maybe a few stories here and there in the papers? Or is there really very little hope about TV coverage for these down ballot campaigns?
I think it's very hard to get TV coverage, and I would be working the much more likely, I read Moneyball. It's like, go for the single, don't go for the home run. So you really do want to work in the blogs and the venues that are covering your race. However, it doesn't mean that a good communications director or candidate getting closer to election day or the last day to register to vote, some other hook that the media could tie it to go do something, but know the medium. If it's TV, it's got to be visually interesting. Not just reading a book to students in a school, but really something cool. Or if it's radio, does it sound good? I mean, is there a great sound to get there, and is it newsworthy? You can do it. You won't get it every week, but a really strategic effort has a good shot at producing something once. Once you get into that final window of the race, then these things come much quicker.
So if a candidate really has something to say, or they're trying to carve their way into one position and kind of pull out ahead of their opponent or something, do you feel like letters to the editor or op-eds are useful?
You're going to, this is where we insert the sound effect of me snoring. No, they're not. I don't think they are. I think that you could not imagine more than a candidate's spouse. I think a letter to the editor reader is the most informed voter out there. They are reading literally everything. So no, I don't think you're budging them at all because they're taking in so much information. No, I hear even op-eds I'm highly suspicious of.
Yeah, and most newspapers have a prohibition against submitting op-eds during an election time. They don't want to have to open up their op-ed sections to 98 candidates.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's a hard and fast rule, but I think generally most editorial boards and papers across the country don't allow submissions of op-eds unless it's a special circumstance, is my thinking on that.
And what are you getting anyways? Because again, it's super high informed voters that are reading every piece of mail, but that's also the problem. They're reading every piece of mail, and they already probably knew who they were going to vote for before either candidate in the race was born. I'm thinking when I talked about maybe how I'd go get TV, sometimes they're stunts, but they're really beautiful. You go a campaign took money from an oil company, so go deliver a fake drum of oil to their office. A good visual, that kind of stuff. Or those are the kind of things I'm thinking of that may get you a bite at the apple for the larger media outlets.
Yeah. Any advice on editorial board interviews? So if people are going for ed board interviews and endorsements from newspapers, what should people have prepared?
Do your research on who's in the room. Try to praise them for a piece they've done recently or an editorial they did recently. I find that's just a great connection to start with. Or refer back to it during the interview, maybe something else oh, you guys wrote on this last week. I thought that was really good and kind of informed me on this. They're human. They like to know people are reading their stuff and getting something out of it. I think that's really important. Be yourself. If you go in there and try to pull one over, it just doesn't work. They see right through it. And if an editorial board isn't going to endorse you, and there are races where they are not, you just still got to you go in there, you try to draw the distinctions of where you do agree, and where you don't, you show that you have information or beliefs that don't allow you to get to where they are. And the reason why is oftentimes editorials are we didn't really like this Marco guy, but he's got some good points here. Or it's, oh my God, he's going to blow up the world. Don't vote for Marco. It really is sometimes gradients, and it's important to try to just diminish how much damage they do.
Well, they'll also call you out for not showing up for an interview. So
sometimes, sometimes there's crazy messages. There are candidates who didn't show up and literally said, "I'll be doorbelling," and then they win. And it's like, well, I mean, I've one of my big races, the editorial did like 17 pieces against my candidate, and we still won, like 17. And they don't sell ads on the editorial page for a reason. It's a little bit up there. I mean, I think within the bubble, I think it's a very important venue, and people do read, discuss, and forward stuff. But I don't think it moves the needle as much as it used to in the old days when newspapers were oftentimes the only thing discussing news in your locality.
All right, we got to wrap up here. So final question. You're watching the changing nature of the press and the media. You've been doing this a long time, and you are in the battlefield right now as it relates to the press. What do you see on the horizon for campaigns as it relates to press? Are we really moving away to like a tweet press release kind of model where social media is going to be driving a lot of the news stories, or are some of the old standbys still reliable for campaigns?
I think yes to all of that. I think the role of the communication side of a campaign has just expanded dramatically. I'm sure their salaries have not, but you now have a 360-degree view. I mean, imagine a campaign in the 70s. You really had to keep the newspapers happy, because TV bounced, and still does to an extent, bounces off the newspaper coverage. Now it's the reporters many reporters are required to tweet X number of times per day. No joke. So you're not just feeding reporters on Twitter, you're feeding your followers on Twitter, and then you're feeding people who are really influential Twitterers on Twitter, let alone Instagram and everything else out there on Facebook. So I think you're forced to do all of this. You still need to look for that, can I get the one big TV shot before ballots go out or election day approaches, but also the question of what do we tweet for this 2-hour block. So you're doing all of it, and you've got to be interesting and poignant, and that's hard to do. It's a much harder job than it was even 15 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Yeah. Well, Marco, thank you so much for joining us today. This was incredibly helpful and packed full of information for our listeners. So we really appreciate you taking the time out today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you again to Marco Lowe for joining us. This was fantastic. Political commentator for King 5 News and adjunct professor at Seattle University. Thank you so much for that. So much content.
It's super fun. There was so much great advice in there. And I'm really happy to have someone else confirm my press releases are useless most of the time. Kind of thought process. It's nice to be validated in that.
For sure. And I think the other thing that would be helpful is a part 2 to this. So he gave us a very good campaign perspective on the press and how to deal with the press and tips and tricks on how to do it from a campaign perspective. We need to have a reporter on now and hear their side of what drives them nuts about dealing with campaigns. I'm sure it'll be focused on press releases, but there's probably 15 other tips and tricks that they can give us on that as well. So and thank you to our regular listeners here in the United States, our prospective candidates, politicals. We are very appreciative of your feedback and your suggestions on what we should be covering. And if you have some suggestions, please feel free to email us at podcast@electionu.com. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on iTunes and Spotify and pretty much anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. So please continue to leave those ratings and reviews. We love them. It increases our search capabilities when you listen to us, and we're very appreciative. We
love you.
Yeah, we respond to everybody.
Thanks.
I am Jason Bennett, your co-host.
I'm Rainey Cohen.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.